recording. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let me check this. Okay, good. Very good. Welcome to you all. This was supposed to be a weekly satsang. It hasn't been weekly for some time because my health has been up and down. So for that reason, we won't do any live sessions for a while. Instead, when I'm feeling up to it, I'll come here and record some answers to some of the questions. And I'm really missing this because some of these questions are just excellent, wonderful, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to discuss this with you. And of course, you can, even though we're not having live satsangs, you can continue to email me your email questions, and then we'll answer them here. And as always, we do have more questions than we can handle in a given session. So let me get started. We'll see how far we can go. Our first question is from Sen Geun. Doesn't say where Sen is from. He says, if you are already what you want to be, Brahman, and that's my guru's language. Puja Swami Tadatmananda, like that expression. You already are who you want to be. You already have what you want to obtain. This is a famous quotation from him. So, Sen's question, if you already are that Brahman, and action is better than non-action. Now, this is a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, where Sri Krishna is giving spiritual instruction to Arjuna, and he tells I forget the Sanskrit, but he tells Arjuna that it is his duty to fight, and that action is better than non-action. The Sanskrit won't come. It's okay. So San's question then is, then should one continue or stop pursuing one's dreams? So given these two messages, which are actually contradictory, right? Your first message is you already are Brahman. And second message is from Sri Krishna, action is better than non-action. And so Sen is confused, and not surprisingly, because it's not clear, based on these two statements, should one continue pursuing your dreams, or should one cease to pursue dreams? The reason these statements are confused is they're taken out of context. Any statement, any word, gains its meaning from context. And especially the one who is being described, or the one who is being taught to, is important. Let me make that clear. The second one, where he says, action is better than non-action, that's a statement from Sri Krishna to Arjuna. That's the context. It comes from the Bhagavad Gita. And Arjuna is not yet enlightened. So Krishna, an enlightened being, is teaching Arjuna, one who is not yet enlightened. That's the context. And for one who is not enlightened, action is better than non-action. And therefore, Arjuna should pursue his dreams. And his dreams in the context of the Bhagavad Gita and in the context of the Mahabharata, where the Bhagavad Gita is found, Arjuna dreams for peace. They're in the midst of this horrible crisis, and they're about to begin a terrible war with the Kauravas. Arjuna wants it to be over. But how to bring that war to an end? If Arjuna walks off the battlefield, the war won't end, correct? The war will continue in its absence. In fact, not only will the war continue, the war will have an undesirable outcome if Arjuna fails to fight. So then for Arjuna, is this in focus? Yes. I hope so. Sorry. So then for Arjuna, the warrior, who is not yet enlightened, he is instructed by Sri Krishna that action is better than non-action. Therefore, Arjuna should pursue his dreams of peace. And sadly, his dreams of peace can only be accomplished if he remains on the battlefield and brings the battle to an end. The first part, though, was quoting my guru, "You already are what you want to be." And of course, my guru is paraphrasing the Upanishads, the portion of the Vedas where these teachings originate. And "you are what you want to be," is that a statement? That's a statement from a different perspective. The second perspective, Sri Krishna addresses Arjuna, who is striving for enlightenment and at the same time striving to fulfill his duties in life. In the first one, you already are what you want to be, what you want to be. You already are Brahman. Okay. Now, that being so, and you may have heard me say that's a little abstract statement, so what I've said several times is your true nature is already divine. That's a little bit more accessible way of putting it. It's not that you become that, that divinity. That divinity already is your true nature within, and it remains to be discovered, remains to be realized. So this statement is addressed to also to one who is not yet enlightened. You already are what you want to be, Brahman. Now the question is, should that spiritual seeker being addressed here work to fulfill his or her dreams or not? Once again, it depends on who you're talking to. When Pujya Swamiji talked to us, the students who had gathered in front of him to attend a 3-year-long course in Vedanta, for us, our only dream at that time, in the midst of our 3-year-long course with him, our only dream was enlightenment. So the question, Sen's question, then, should one continue or should one stop pursuing their dreams? In the context of those students in our 3-year-long course, the only dream to be pursued is enlightenment. But that's a fairly restricted context, isn't it? There were 60 of us students. In 1987, we had gathered in Pujya Swami Dayananda's ashram in the Poconos for a 3-year-long course. That is the context. And in that context, there's no other dream at that point in time other than enlightenment. So no other dreams to be pursued. But suppose Pujya Swamiji was saying that on a public lecture. He often used to travel to different temples and ashrams, and he would give discourses, public discourses, in which he would address a wide range of people, not 60 students focused on enlightenment, but rather hundreds of mostly householders who had busy, complex lives and had lots of different things on their plate, to use the American expression. So how should they interpret these statements? The second statement, action is better than non-action, meaning those people should definitely fulfill their responsibilities. Even when we were studying with Pujya Swamiji in that 3-year course, we had responsibilities. We had to run the ashram. In fact, in those days, we were building the ashram. Sometimes we were attending classes, sometimes we were actually working on constructing the buildings and so forth. So duties must be fulfilled, and that's really Sri Krishna's message in the Bhagavad Gita. But that first statement is not from the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is all about karma yoga. That's the predominant message. Not the only message, but the predominant message of the Bhagavad Gita is karma yoga, fulfill your duties as sadhana, as spiritual practice. This other statement, you already are what you want to be. That statement, how to take that statement depends on where you are in life. If you have other responsibilities, you must fulfill those responsibilities. If you are not yet enlightened, and you have dreams of gaining enlightenment, then, as we say in American English, go for it. But watch this. If you are a householder, if you have discovered that these teachings will lead you to the highest goal in life, and then your boss gives you a choice of working overseas 16 hours a day for the next 2 years for the sake of preserving your job, or the boss says, or we can give you early retirement, we'll pay you this much money, you can go and get some other work if you want. So look at the contrast. In that situation, if you were to have the dream of going overseas and working and getting this big salary and becoming the big manager, the big shot, if that is your dream, by pursuing that dream, working 16 hours a week, 16 hours a day overseas, how would that affect your ability to dwell on these teachings of Vedanta for the sake of reaching the highest goal? There we see a conflict. One thing that's very, and I think just a kind of a surface level comment I should make here, just because we shouldn't skip over it. The idea that you already are what you want to be. Now, let me rephrase it. I'm not sure that Sen meant this as his question, but it's a common question. The question usually comes in a slightly different form. The question will come like this: Swamiji, if I already are Brahman, if my true nature already is Brahman, then why should I go to work on Monday morning? Question often comes in a manner like that. And here again, we have to look at the context. If I already am Brahman, do I have to go to work Monday? Would an enlightened person say that? If I am already Brahman? No. So therefore, whoever is asking this question is not yet enlightened. Since they're not yet enlightened, then they should be engaged in performing karma yoga. Karma yoga means fulfilling your worldly duties as a spiritual practice. The message given to Arjuna, the message given throughout the Bhagavad Gita. So from that standpoint, and that might be part of Sen's question, it might be some of your questions. The fact that your true nature is Brahman, if you haven't discovered that yet, what difference does it make? If you have discovered that, if you have discovered that your true nature is Brahman, you won't be asking this question. You won't be sending questions to Swami Tadatmananda. You might not even be watching the Satsang. So we need to understand carefully the context, but the basic principle here is, if you are not yet enlightened, you must fulfill your duties, because to fail to fulfill your duties will create obstacles to your spiritual growth. This is not our topic, but it's important to recognize if you fail to fulfill your responsibilities, your life will end up in a mess. When your life is in a mess, your sadhana, your spiritual practice, will suffer. So, if you're not yet enlightened, fulfill your duties as a spiritual practice, which means karma yoga. Good. Next question comes from Shiv. Shiv lives in New York, nearby. Shiv says, if eternal stillness is beyond concepts, not if, it is, eternal stillness means your true nature. That term, eternal stillness, we should understand. Eternal stillness refers to your true nature as pure consciousness. Pure consciousness doesn't change. It is immutable, the word that people like to use. Unchanging consciousness. Unchanging consciousness means doesn't go anywhere, doesn't move, doesn't say anything. That's the idea. And eternally. That's the idea, eternal stillness. And I'll paraphrase here. That eternal stillness is your true nature. And even the I, the sense of individuality, what we call ahankara, can dissolve into no mind. No mind actually, again, means that pure consciousness. Then, what moves you to speak at all? And let me just paraphrase a little bit further. I think what Shiv means is this. If you have discovered your true nature to be pure consciousness, which is eternally still, eternally at rest, eternally absorbed, and there's no separate individuality, I, who has all of these wants and desires. I want this, I want to do that, I want to do that. Then in that context, Shiv says, then what moves you to speak at all? Why would you, and I'll paraphrase, why would you do anything at all? Why would you get engaged in any action? Why, and to put a whole different spin on it, why does an enlightened person do anything at all? Why wouldn't an enlightened person just sit in silence? I hope that's a fair paraphrase of Shiv's question. And the answer to that is very simple. The enlightened person is consciousness. Consciousness doesn't do anything. Consciousness can't do anything. Consciousness can't speak. Consciousness can't move. Consciousness can't disturb the silence. The silence is the nature of the pure consciousness that the enlightened person has discovered himself or herself to be. So then, that being so, where does activity come from? And here we have to really understand Vedanta well. Activity doesn't come from unchanging consciousness. Can't come from unchanging consciousness. Immutable consciousness. Unborn, uncreated consciousness. Transcendent consciousness, the inner divinity, is not the one who engages in action. Actions come from the mind, and they come naturally. It's the mind that produces thoughts, not consciousness. Right? Think about that. It's your mind that thinks. It's your mind that causes your limbs to move. But what's hidden here in this comment? First, he says, why? Is it compassion? Is it a play? Is it an echo of form returning to form? Or maybe there's no reason. This is all perhaps true. It's also very poetic. It's also not very clear. And I really have a value for clarity. So let me say then that the reason your mind, the reason the mind of an enlightened person continues to think, the reason the mouth of an enlightened person continues to talk, the reason the limbs of an enlightened person continue to move, the reason is it's natural. It's the nature of the body-mind-sense complex to be engaged in action. Ishvara created us in this way that our bodies and minds are engaged in some kind of activity or another. So the enlightened person remains, the body and mind of an enlightened person remain natural, and as such are engaged in action. Okay, next. Let me see, this one. Let me come back to these if we need to. I'm afraid there's so many questions here. This is a question from Sandra. Sandra lives in Amsterdam. And she asks, she's watching the new series of videos on the Mahabharata, Vedantic teachings from the Mahabharata. And by the way, let me just mention, though, I'm really happy we're finally able to publish those videos. We've not published them before because when I taught them here starting in 2015. 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, we didn't have video recording. We only had audio recording. Problem is, no one really listens to audio recordings much, so we had a group of volunteers who took those audios. There are actually about 200 classes. Mahabharata, of course, is a huge text, and this was a class on Vedantic teachings from the Mahabharata. So a group of our students got together and they turned all of these audios into videos by including the Sanskrit text, by including the Roman transliteration, by including my translation. So all of that, you can see that while the audio comes. So, but now Sandra's question is, it's a big text. It's going to be, we're uploading 1 episode a week, and that's going to go on for several years. There are so many lectures. So Sandra asks, is it okay if I listen to 1 episode without having listened to the prior episodes? And the reason she's asking that question is Sandra knows very well the Mahabharata is a story. And we all know that if you come into the story halfway, you don't really know what's going on. And the story of the Mahabharata is exceedingly complicated. So if you don't get we call it backstory, a nice term. If you don't know the backstory, it's hard to follow what's going on. But the lectures that we're posting to my YouTube channel really don't focus on the story that much. They're Vedantic teachings. And Vedantic teachings then don't depend on that kind of continuity. They really are different topics. So that whole series, we're only, I think, 10 or 11 classes into the series, you'll find that every class is a different topic. Sometimes a topic that begins in one class will continue into the next. In that situation, it might be helpful to watch the prior video, but in general, the classes will move from one topic to another. So you can actually go onto the YouTube channel, and we call it cherry picking. Cherry picking means you can choose those videos that have topics that you find interesting. And those videos which have topics that you don't find interesting, you can leave them fine. And that's fine. I don't mind if you do that at all. So some practical comments, advice for Sandra and any of you. By the way, I would highly recommend watching those videos. It's just, I had a wonderful time going through the Mahabharata to select passages that would be of great importance to students of Advaita Vedanta. I spent half a year I didn't go through every verse of the Mahabharata. It's like 86,000 verses or something. But I skimmed and skimmed, and then I ended up choosing about 2,000 verses. And it's those 2,000 verses which are broken up into different topics that are taught in that series. Give it if you haven't seen it already, give it a try. I think you might connect to that nicely. All right, next question. Excuse me just a moment. Okay, looks okay. Next question comes from Vinay, one of our local students, who Vinay is fixated on this question of Om versus Aum, A-U-M. Om versus Aum. Now, every time you've heard me chant, you've only heard me chant Om, because the Sanskrit word happens to be Om. But nowadays, many people are chanting Aum. And if you ask why, I have a feeling 90% of the reason is because of one famous guru who lives in Coimbatore in South India, named the famous Sadguru, who teaches Aum. And he's very popular. A lot of people are following him. Therefore, if Sadguru chants Aum, they all chant Aum. Problem is, Aum is not a Sanskrit word. And Sadguru himself admits he doesn't know Sanskrit. He's never studied Sanskrit. He admits that openly. He's not studied Bhagavad Gita. He's not studied all these teachings in detail. He's more, in fact, he would call himself a mystic. And a mystic who's not confined to the Hindu religion, even. So a mystic is one who's guided from within, instead of being guided by a religious or spiritual tradition. And I don't say that to criticize it, just to make the point. It's different. The path I've been on is one that's guided by the scriptures of the ancient rishis and guided by the teachings of my own guru, who comes from this tradition, a tradition that goes back, teacher-student, teacher-student, teacher-student tradition, going all the way back to Shankaracharya and to the rishis who came long before. So these two perspectives are very different. So the perspective that you'll hear from me is one based on Sanskrit, one based on Shastra, the teachings of the ancient rishis, and also based on this, what we call sampradaya, teaching tradition, that which has been passed on through the ages. Sadguru is very different. He is a mystic, so he is not guided by Sanskrit. He doesn't understand Sanskrit. He's not guided by Shastra, scripture, because he doesn't know Sanskrit. He can't study the scriptures. And he himself will say that his teachings are not based exclusively on Hindu scriptures. He would agree, I think, to the statement. His teachings come from within. And for that reason, then, he also is not part of a sampradaya, a teaching tradition. He teaches what comes in his own mind. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong. I am saying that it doesn't come from a teaching tradition, it doesn't come from scriptures, and doesn't come from Sanskrit. Again, not right and wrong, just different. So with that in mind, we can try to address Vinay's questions. And Vinay actually gives a number of different arguments. And I'll just, and the arguments are interesting, by the way, which is why I'm happy to take up these questions. So, the first argument is this. Some people say that the Mandukya Upanishad prescribes chanting Aum because it explicitly divides Om into 3 letters. So, the Mandukya Upanishad does indeed split Om into 3 letters using grammatical principles. Om is grammatically considered to be A plus U, and these 2 letters combine to become O. But by the way, the first word of the Mandukya Upanishad is Om, because Om is the Sanskrit word. Aum is not a Sanskrit word, but here's the point of the question. He claims that Mandukya Upanishad prescribes chanting Aum. It doesn't. It divides Om into 3 syllables, 3 letters. It doesn't prescribe chanting Aum. In fact, in the text itself, the word comes as Om, O-M. It doesn't come A-U-M, where Om comes independently of this division into 3. So can you show us from the text itself whether the division is symbolic only or whether it actually commands the actual chanting of the 3 sounds? Well, it doesn't. By the way, it's a very short text, so you can go through the text yourself and discover it doesn't prescribe chanting 3 sounds, a, u, ma. It does break Om into 3 sounds for the sake of teaching Advaita Vedanta, and that is indeed symbolic. So the fact that the Mandukya Upanishad uses the word Om and doesn't prescribe a-u-ma, Aum, handles this first objection. The Mandukya Upanishad, which is the first place we see Om divided into a-u-ma, that Upanishad itself does not prescribe chanting a-u-ma. Second question. Some say both Om and Aum is fine. It's just a personal choice. Absolutely. If you want to chant Aum, I have no problem with that. But if you ask me, do the scriptures tell us to chant Om or Aum? I will tell you. Scriptures don't tell you to chant Aum. Scriptures tell you to chant the Sanskrit word or syllable Om. Technically, it's called a bijakshara, a seed mantra, a root mantra. So I have, you can do what you want. And the question goes on, how important is it to rely on sampradaya, teaching tradition, I used that word before, and shastra, scripture, instead of modern opinions? Well, it depends on what you're after. Should you, it's interesting. So the reading between the lines, the ancient tradition says Om, and a modern teacher says Aum. By the way, he's in the minority among modern teachers. Most modern teachers have studied Sanskrit, most modern teachers have studied the scriptures, and most modern teachers are part of a sampradaya. So in this case, Sadhguru is an outlier. So he is a self-declared mystic and not engaged in these ways. So then the question becomes, how important is it to rely on sampradaya, which means ancient teachings, and shastra, as opposed to modern opinions? So throwing out ancient traditions and going for modern opinions. I would say it depends on what you're after. If you're after, there's a silly example, but I think it'll make it quite clear. What are you after? If you're after, suppose you want to become a brain surgeon. You want to do surgery on the brain. Ancient traditions aren't going to help you at all. You'd be well advised to stay with modern medical science. On the other hand, if your goal is to walk in the footsteps of the ancient rishis and discover what they discovered, that is, if you want to engage in the kind of spiritual practice that the ancient rishis engaged in, then modern opinions are less helpful, including the opinions of Sadhguru, will be less helpful to you than traditional shastric, scriptural teachings, because those scriptural teachings are suitable for an ancient pursuit of enlightenment in the manner that the ancient rishis sought enlightenment. On the other hand, modern teachings are maybe suitable for modern subject matters like brain surgery, also maybe for some very modern seekers. If you don't care about Sanskrit, if you don't care about scriptures, if none of that is important to you, and you like the way Aum sounds, and you want to chant it like that, there's no harm in it. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. Next. I think there are quite a few, but they're interesting, and I hope you'll find them interesting. I find it very interesting. Next. Some argue that sandhi is a grammatical device that connects words and letters. Specifically, when a is followed by u, the Sanskrit grammatical mechanism called sandhi forces a and u to combine. And when they combine, it becomes a single new letter, and that new letter is Om. O, just O. So, some argue that sandhi was created only to speed up spoken language. That's completely conjecture. Can you say English was created for the sake of speeding up language? You can't say English was created for the sake of speeding up oral pronunciation. You can't superimpose these kinds of ideas on any language. So, the question, a claim is made that, some argue that sandhi was created only to speed up spoken Sanskrit. Absolutely incorrect. If you say, why does sandhi exist in the language? It exists because it was natural to a spoken language. Notice this idea of combining sounds is absent in written languages. In languages, do you know what? I'm not going to teach. This is a very complex point about why sandhi exists. It'd take me half an hour to explain it. I'm not going to explain. I think if you go to, I think there is a video on my YouTube channel, Introduction to Sanskrit Chanting, something like that, Vedic chant. Introduction to Vedic chanting. I'm pretty sure that video explains in depth why letters combine. A and U combine into O. Why is answered in that video. Let me not address it here. And it says, some argue that sandhi was created to speed up spoken Sanskrit, so in slow meditation we can separate it a, u, ma. I've never, it's actually kind of silly because Sanskrit language only has 3 lengths of sounds. A sound can be short, a sound can be long, a song can be 3 measures long, 3 units long. So 1 unit, 2 units, and 3 units long. It can't go longer than that. So Om happens to be 2 units long. So the pronunciation of Om is Om. Now, yes, it's true that in meditation, let me finish his question and I'll come back to this. Sorry, I get caught up and you get me going on grammar, you're in trouble, and that's what's happening right now. I've spent a lot of effort immersing myself in grammar, and we don't need all of that right now, but let's address the question. He says, is sandhi optional depending on context, or is it a fixed phonetic law that applies even in chanting and meditation? That's a good question. Is sandhi optional? Yes. That is, there's no rule that says you have to combine this letter and this letter. Yes, but. Yes, if. The rules of Sanskrit grammar given by Panini are fairly complex. One of the rules goes like this. If one letter is at the end of the prior word and one letter is at the beginning of the next word, that is, we're looking at two different words, then sandhi is indeed optional. But the great grammarian Panini makes it very clear, if these two letters are in the same word, combining them is not optional. Therefore, in Sanskrit, you can never write an a and an u next to each other in the same word because the rules of sandhi necessarily apply and force the a and u to combine. Something else, though, he mentioned is how about when we're chanting, we elongate that om. I'll give you my guru's answer to that. My guru was very, very traditional and very Sanskritic, and he would just say grammatically to chant om is wrong. He says om is 3 units long. Om is not om. Om is not om. Om is om, 3 units long. In grammar, we talk about hrasva, short, dirgha, long, and pluta, extra long. So then what are we doing in meditation? And I myself conduct meditations in which we chant Om. Why are we doing that? Well, it's really helpful for meditation. It is not in keeping with the laws of Sanskrit, with the grammatical rules of Sanskrit. Therefore, if you're chanting Om, 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 that is grammatically correct. If you're chanting, as we sometimes do here at our ashram, we chant Om, that is not grammatically correct. It's useful for meditation. It's not grammatically correct. Therefore, my guru would make the distinction, Om is Sanskrit, Om, it's not Sanskrit. It's using Om as a syllable for the sake of meditation, which is exactly what Sadhguru does. He just, instead of using Om, he uses Aum. You can use any sound for meditation. There's no rule that says you can only use Om. There's no rule that you can't use Aum. There's no rule that you can't use Om. The rule is, in meditation, use whatever works. In writing Sanskrit, you can't write Aum. In writing Sanskrit, you can't even write Om. Only 3 times, or 3 units. So we use what is helpful. And just to finish this up and go a few more questions here, the great example of this in our modern times is Dr. Herbert Benson, who was one of the first medical researchers who looked at how Om affects how chanting Om affects the mind and brain. He was a professor at Harvard University. He wrote books about this. He studied meditation. It was back in the, I think, 1960s, so quite early. And he actually did some studies. And you know, when you do a medical study, you have to have an experiment with groups of subjects. You have a control group, and then you have the experimental group. And the experimental group, he wouldn't use Om, because Om has a religious basis. Instead, he had them chant one, the English word one. One, one, one. To study meditation, he had his test subjects recite one. It worked, not surprisingly. But something I'll point out, and I don't think this even comes as one of the questions here. There's a huge difference between one and Om. And a difference not to scientists, a difference that would be significant, as I said, not to a scientist, but to a religious or spiritual seeker, a difference would be very crucial. To a scientist, one works fine for meditation. To a spiritual seeker, one is just an English word, whereas Om is both a prayer and a name for Brahman, the absolute reality. Now, a scientist doesn't care about Om being a name for absolute reality. The scientist certainly doesn't care about Om being a prayer. And maybe Sadhguru also doesn't care that Aum is not a prayer. Aum is not a... I'm losing my train of thought here. Aum is not a prayer. Aum is not a name for anything. It's a made-up sound. Actually, I should have mentioned this before, but Sadhguru was not a disciple of this Mahesh Yogi. Mahesh Yogi was the guru who brought transcendental meditation first to the West and then to India. He kind of did it in reverse order. He first taught it in Europe, in America, and then only later it got popular in India. Anyway, but Mahesh Yogi was he was also an outlier, a little bit like Sadhguru, although different also. Unlike Sadhguru, Mahesh Yogi knew some Sanskrit. He also followed the scriptures, Vedic scriptures, so that's quite different. But when it came to meditation, Mahesh Yogi invented his own mantras, and he himself would have agreed to that statement. He designed his own mantras, and he called them meaningless syllables. So Mahesh Yogi discounted Om, or any mantra, as being a name for Brahman or some deity. Mahesh Yogi discounted Om, or any mantra, as being a name for Brahman, he called it meaningless syllable. But Mahesh Yogi knew very well that meaningless syllables worked well. Now, the word one that Dr. Benson used has a meaning. Suppose instead of one, he used some of Mahesh Yogi's mantras, like Haring or Aing. These are meaningless syllables created by Mahesh Yogi. By the way, they're secret. Shh. They're secret, but they're also available on the internet nowadays. So anyway, and I don't mean to disparage that tradition either. But look at the difference in orientation. Mahesh Yogi, even though he accepted the importance of scripture and Sanskrit, he noted that meaningless syllables work pretty well for meditation. So if Mahesh Yogi's syllables like Aing and Haring work well for meditation, would Aum not also work well for meditation? Of course. Aum is a meaningless syllable and it works just fine for meditation, but it's not a prayer. Aum is not a prayer. Aum is not a name for Brahman. Om is a prayer. And Om is a name for Brahman. Okay, more here. A claim is made that the vowel O didn't exist in early Sanskrit, that it arose as a Sandhi average of A and U. Do Panini's grammar and Vedic Shiksha texts confirm the independent existence of the Oms, of the sound O? Absolutely. Whoever said that the vowel O didn't exist in early Sanskrit didn't study the Vedas. The very first usage of Sanskrit comes in the Vedas. The earliest of the 4 Vedas is the Rig Veda, and the very first word of the Rig Veda is Om. So O is present as the very first syllable or letter in the earliest Vedas. It is the earliest usage of Sanskrit, so this is just wrong. Okay. Dual usage. Is there any precedent in traditional practice or text for a dual model? Chanting Om in mantras but stretching it out, Ma in meditation, or is this a purely modern reinterpretation? I've been studying Vedanta for a long time, right? More than 4 decades, something. I have never, and I've studied a lot of texts, Sanskrit texts, traditional Sanskrit texts, and commentaries, Sanskrit commentaries on those Sanskrit texts. I have never encountered any commentator or author talking about explaining the use of AUM, Aum, for the sake of meditation. It is not there, so far as I've seen. And I doubt, if I kept looking, I don't think I would find it. Okay, one more. Name versus sound. Some say Om is the name, while Aum is the actual sound. This actually violates Sanskrit phonetics right away, because Sanskrit phonetics say that there's no difference between the name and the sound. Comparing it, so some would compare Z and Z. Z. By the way, in American English, we don't say Z. In American English, we only say Z. I think many others, British, especially British English, would say Z. Could you clarify why this analogy is misleading in Sanskrit? Because Sanskrit is not like English. In English, if you want to differentiate between Z and Z, fine. If you want to make any of these divisions, that's fine. In Sanskrit, if you study Sanskrit properly, Om is Om, O is O, and there is no way in the world you can turn it into Aum. Om is a name, Om is a name. O is a name of a letter, Om is the name of a seed syllable, Om is a name for Brahman, and you can't differentiate and say Om is a name, Aum is the actual sound, Aum is not the actual sound. There's no basis for that at all. I think this is the most I've talked on this topic ever. I found it fascinating to go through these objections. I hope you did as well. And also maybe my approach will give you a sense of the thoroughness of this teaching tradition. To simply say Aum is a mystical syllable you can use for meditation, that's fine. I would accept that. Aum is a mystical syllable that you can chant for meditation, no problem. But it is not the same as Om. All right, enough said. And that is based on this whole tradition of teachings. Maybe take 1 or 2 more questions here. Question from Amit, who lives in India. My question is regarding doership. If we surrender to God's will and say that all action is henceforth will be directed by God and not our ego, we then keep our planning mind aside, does it really happen that our actions would be directed or guided by divine will? Complicated question and some huge issues here. First of all, suppose, let's just explore this we can get very technical about this. Let me try to take it in a non-technical way. Suppose a spiritual seeker says, "Oh God, hey Ishvara, I want to surrender my will to you. From now on, I will do your will. I will not follow my own will." That is a statement of intent. And it's a noble statement of intent. But when you utter that statement of intent, I'm not going to use my personal will, I'm only going to follow Ishvara's will, does that statement of intent automatically turn off your mind's willful nature? How do you turn that one off? We're driven by desire. Every enlightened person is driven, every unenlightened person is driven by desire. When you see it, I want it, and then the will kicks in to go and get it. That will continue. Sorry, we got a pun going on here. Will and will. That will continue. How about, let's have fun with this. That kind of will continue. Got it. That kind of will certainly continue if you're not enlightened. It's a beautiful prayer. And it's also, we can say, part of a prayer life, part of karma yoga, when you try to set aside your own selfish desires and choose what follows dharma. And here Amit makes reference to divine will. What do we mean by divine will? This is another issue that we should understand. Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, is not a human being like you and me. So therefore, Ishvara is not going to have a human-like will. You decided to watch this satsang video. I decided to sit down and record it. These are examples of human will. Do you think Ishvara has a human kind of will? Ishvara gets up in the morning and decides what he's going to do or what he's not going to do. We have to give up that kind of naive thinking. So this again is a huge topic, and I'm not going to teach it in full here, but just to suggest it. And we've talked about this before. What people call Ishvara's will is what my guru called Ishvara's intelligent order. Ishvara's intelligent order. To give that example, I'm looking for, I just need a prop. So if we say that according to natural laws, my guru explains how the laws of nature, including the laws of karma, are an expression of Ishvara's intelligence. Therefore, according to Ishvara's intelligence, according to Ishvara's intelligent order, objects fall and they accelerate at 9.8 meters per second, as you remember from some class. We call that Ishvara's intelligent order. If you are less of a scientist, if you are less of a follower of Advaita Vedanta, and if you're more of an extremely devotional person, you might say it is Ishvara's will that this object falls. It's another usage of language. So what the bhakta, what the devotee calls Ishvara's will, the Vedantin or the scientist simply says Ishvara's natural order. So Ishvara's order, the laws of nature and the laws of karma, these are expressions of Ishvara's will. Now the question goes on. Because our prarabdha karmas will still be at play, our vasanas will come in some form and govern our actions. I'll explain this in just a moment. So it does not sound logical that would we be operating by some divine will on the surrender of doership. Oh my gosh. Also, you mentioned that God does not intervene in our day-to-day affairs of life. These questions are really good, but they're huge topics. Let me suggest, let's see. Let me just take up one part. By the way, if you haven't already watched my videos on karma, it's helpful. Because he uses, Amit uses the word prarabdha karma here. And if we were to get into the details of answering his question, we have to talk about prarabdha karma, we have to talk about sanchita karma, we have to talk about agami karma, often called kriyamana karma. We have to get into all of this technical distinctions. We're not going to go there right now. If you haven't already understood that, please watch those. There's a playlist on the doctrine of karma. Let's just talk about one thing right now, and that is the actions of an unenlightened person versus the actions of an enlightened person. The actions of an unenlightened person are driven by will, and what is it that directs the will is an individual person that says, I want it. I am going to do that. I want it, and I am going to do that to get it. That I, that ego, in Sanskrit we call ahankara, is the one who wields the will. Will is a mental faculty. This is really important, by the way, and it's also a little tricky. So take a moment and pay close attention. Will is a mental faculty. Mental faculties must be wielded. A mental faculty like a tool. You know, if you have a hammer, there has to be someone using that tool. If you have a mental tool, like willpower, someone has to use it. Someone has to wield that power of will. Who wields that power of will? A common misconception is that Atma wields will. Absolutely incorrect. If you think that's so, you haven't read the works of Shankara. You haven't understood Shankara. Because from day one, so to speak, Shankara goes on disproving that wrong notion that Atma, pure consciousness, is the wielder of will. In his works, and his works are based on the teachings of the ancient rishis. Ancient rishis didn't get into this topic extensively. Shankara did. And he makes it extraordinarily clear that the one who wields the will being a mental faculty, the one who wields it is ahankara, ego, sense of individuality. That part of your mind that says me, I. So when you say, I want it, that desire belongs to the little I. Maybe there's a nice way of distinguishing capital I versus little I. Capital I is Atma, pure consciousness. Little I is ego. That mental, to me it's like a thought masquerading as a conscious being. It's an imposter. In fact, we call it the I thought. The I thought. So it's the I thought, the ahankara, who wields the will. So when we think about an enlightened person, does an enlightened person have the faculty of will? What an interesting question. I think we'll maybe end with this. So that's just 5 more minutes. We'll just go through this. Does an enlightened person possess the faculty of will? And while you're thinking about that, I'll give you an interesting anecdote of my guru, Puja Swami Tadatmananda. I lived with him for 3 or 4 years. I have no doubt that he was enlightened. When you live with someone for that much time, you can tell. In fact, you can really tell if they're not enlightened. Someone's defects will definitely come out if you live with them for 3 or 4 years. Okay. In my mind, absolutely, without question, enlightened. When he was 70 years old, just a year younger than I am now, he decided to create an institution called AIM for Seva, All India Movement, AIM, A-I-M, All India Movement for Seva, service, community service, social service. Now the question is, he chose to do that. He didn't have to. No one made him do that. So then the question becomes, did he use his will or not? This is really subtle and really complex. Let me just talk about it for a few minutes, and we'll see if it makes any sense. First of all, do enlightened people have human brains or not? Okay. Do enlightened people have minds, human minds or not? Of course. Does a normal human mind have the I thought? Now, this is a very profound thing. This, again, is another topic for a 1-hour lecture. Just do it briefly here at the end of our satsang. If an enlightened person doesn't have an I thought, the enlightened person would just sit. Because all actions are motivated by the I thought. When the I thought is absent, by the way, if you meditate deeply enough, your I thought goes away. You become absorbed in meditation. While you're absorbed in meditation, in the absence of the I thought, what can you do? As long as you're absorbed in meditation, you can't do anything. Because the I thought, ego, ahankara, is the one who initiates willful action. Now, here's the tricky part, and we're going to conclude with this. Does an enlightened person have this ego or I thought? Can you follow my reasoning here? If the enlightened person didn't have an I thought or ego, that enlightened person would be incapable of initiating any kind of action whatsoever. The enlightened person literally would just sit there, actionless. So we understand that an enlightened person does have an I thought. Of course, the enlightened person knows it's just a thought. That's a big difference. And there's a big topic we won't go into right now. The enlightened person does have an I thought. The enlightened person knows it's just like every other thought and doesn't take it seriously. And the final point here, and perhaps the most important one, is your I thought is driven to initiate actions mostly based on your desires. Is it not so? Why do you decide to do what you do? Because of desires. Desire-driven, willful actions are what are performed by those who are not yet enlightened. If you're not enlightened, you perform willful actions driven by desire. What about an enlightened person? No desires. Willful action not driven by desires. So look at the difference. Unenlightened, willful action driven by desire. Enlightened person, willful action not driven by desire. And that's a huge difference. Because desires are me, selfish. In the absence of selfish desire, you'll find that the willful actions chosen by an enlightened person are absolutely different than willful actions chosen by the willful actions chosen by an enlightened person will be absolutely different than willful actions committed by one who's driven by desire. Yeah, this will be a good place to conclude our satsang for today. As I said, if you have any questions, please email them to me. Maybe later we'll start live satsang, not for a while. Please, in the subject line, please write satsang question, then it'll come to the right mailbox. And we'll conclude with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next time.